is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
Started back on September 19th of 2024 in Whitesburg, Kentucky. Sheriff Shawn Mickey Stines walked into his friend's chambers, the judge of the town, Judge Kevin Mullins. They just had lunch together. They've been friends for quite some time. And then he shot him dead in those chambers right after lunch together. That part is certainly not in dispute. It was all caught on courthouse surveillance. 3 days earlier, Stines had been deposed in a federal civil lawsuit alleging misconduct and corruption tied to his office. Prosecutors say he's guilty of murder. His defense argues he was under extraordinary psychological strain, even raising the possibility of an insanity defense. So before we get into the allegations of corruption, I want to start with the psychology of that breaking point. Siobhan Scott, psychotherapist and author, joining us to help break all this down. And as I always do, I got your books over here in my little desk library. Nightbird, this is your memoir, which is very good, which is new and out wherever you get books. And this also, The Minds of Mass Killers, also available wherever you get books. So let's start with all of this. Sheriff Stines killed Judge Mullins on camera. That in itself, from a psychological standpoint, what does it mean when someone in authority commits violence in the most visible way possible in the judge's chambers where he knows there are cameras, he knows he will be caught right after having lunch with him? Stines' deposition just days earlier was connected to that civil lawsuit about alleged sexual exploitation involving his deputy. How might the fear of exposure psychologically push someone, or is this the push that pushed him towards this catastrophic act?
It's certainly a weird case, which is why everybody's talking about it, because you're right. Obviously, it was more important for him to kill the judge than it was for him to be convicted and in all likelihood go to prison for what he did. So there's a story here, but we don't know what the story is. And so we're left speculating at this point. But what a strange tale with the corruption that seems to go all the way to the top there.
Yeah, and we're going to get into all of that. Let's keep putting some of the clues together and what we know about the actions of the sheriff prior to what we are starting to learn now, because there's a lot of accusations that have come out. We're going to get to that. An interview that Brian Ensign of NewsNation recently did, blowing open the lid on this community if the accusations are true. Sheriff Stines, right after the shooting, and he was apprehended immediately right there. He sounded paranoid, saying things like, "You're going to kill me," to the other officers. And he was sitting there calmly, and he was being treated very calmly too. If you watch those videos, the officers aren't up in his face. They aren't screaming at him. They are just as confused and wondering what the hell just happened here. And they are acting seemingly in a measured way. But what is that? The question of "you're going to kill me." More of a statement almost than a question.
The first thing that popped into my head was, he serious? I mean, was this grounded in reality? Did he suspect that things were so out of kilter among everybody in this town that he was really at risk of being killed in jail or something? I mean, I don't know. But yes, it sounds paranoid. And does it rise to the bar of a psychotic disorder? Certainly, I was reviewing the footage that came out recently of the 13 minutes before the shooting, and he does not look physically, his body language doesn't look like a person who's psychotically paranoid. He's not agitated. He comes into the room looking very calm, sitting there apparently for most of this time having a rather calm demeanor in the discussion with the judge. We'd love to know what they were talking about, but it's hard to make sense of this until we get the rest of the story and hear about whatever psychological evaluations he's had since.
I'm glad you watched that, because that's what I was talking about, where he's sitting there, on the bench out in the hallway. Others are interacting with him. I mean, if you were just watching that and didn't know that he just did what he did, what would you be thinking?
It looks normal. It looks normal. I don't think you would ever imagine. I mean, when you see him come into the room and sit there talking with the judge, and he's got his arms behind his head and kind of kicked back and relaxing, this is not the person who's leaning forward and threatening or pointing his finger or doing any of the gestures that we would associate with a person who's really rageful and ready to commit murder and in a paranoid fantasy of some kind. I mean, he looked okay.
People act out when being put into a corner. And I don't know if he was being put into a corner. Let me preface that, because there's so much we just don't know yet. But let's just, for theory's sake, say he was being put into a corner. And let's for a moment assume that he had nothing to do with any of these accusations that are flying about. He was just in this ecosystem, and he just did his testimony in the civil case. He's having all this simmer in his mind of these horrible things that are alleged of people he trusts, people he knows. I find it hard to believe that he wasn't aware any of this was going on the way it sounds. But let's just for a second say he didn't know about these sort of things. And if he snapped, would that be insanity? Is that insanity? If all this finally got to him, he this deplorable sex ring allegedly that's going on with his friend in these chambers of this community that he patrols, he guards, he's the sheriff. That would, I think, if you didn't know what was going on, would break your heart, would I think could spark you to go very mad and angry at these people who may be perpetrating these things. If that's the case, does he have a case in court?
Well, insanity is a very high bar, and we're basically talking about psychosis. So a person would be having a brain disorder where they're having delusions, hallucinations, distorted thoughts and perceptions, where their thinking is disorganized. And we would hear lots of evidence about that because generally that happens over time. And I think he would have trouble functioning in his job at all if he were truly insane in a psychotic state like that. So I'm skeptical about meeting that high bar, but that state does allow the defense of extreme emotional distress. Most states don't, but that's sort of the crime of passion, the heat of the moment, where somebody becomes so outraged that any of us could imagine being in that situation. Most people under extreme emotional distress do not pick up a gun and go methodically and calmly commit murder. And as you and I have talked before, it's more in those kind of scenarios where somebody walks in and finds their wife in bed with another man, and at that point just has this incredible adrenaline reaction and punches the guy or shoots the guy or something like that. That would be a better fit for extreme emotional distress. And that wouldn't get him off, but it might get him a lesser charge and might be a mitigating circumstance when it came to sentencing. So it'll be really interesting to see this play out and to hear the evidence of what do they have to prove that he was so paranoid or so delusional that this was what caused this.
And we're going to get into that in 1 second. There was one more catalyst to this, and we've talked about it before, but if somebody's just starting to learn about this case, right before he killed him, right before he pulled out the gun and shot him, there was an issue on the cell phones where it was his daughter that was on the cell phone of the judge. A call was made, and shortly thereafter, we don't know what happened on that call, but shortly thereafter, he pulled the trigger on the judge. That I don't know. I have zero idea, but that makes me really wonder if he knew about these horrible things that were going on in the town. Did this somehow make its way back to home? Did something happen with his daughter? Did something happen with one of his daughter's friends? Those are all questions that we just don't know. That, to me, as a father, I think that would be a hard one. If you know this stuff's going on and you found out this guy did it and you happen to have a gun at your side, it may take, it would take a breath. I would have to walk away very fast because I think any more interaction, may get the best of me and go, you're done. I think most fathers would probably feel that way, but we don't know. We just don't know.
Mothers too.
Yes, without a doubt. But we just don't know the answer to that. I'm going to guess. I mean, do you think? I mean, is there any way that interaction with the daughter and the phone is not a major factor in what happened here?
I can't imagine it not being a major factor. And the other thing, I wonder, did he have knowledge of something? Was he trying to discuss it with the judge, give the opportunity for the judge to, say something that was going to be appeasing in a way, something apologetic, and he didn't get that. And so that was the final straw for him. That's certainly a possibility because, there's got to be meaning in the phone calls made.
The sheriff in the video, we see it obviously right up into the point where he pulls the trigger. He looks, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't appear to be enraged. It's just, it goes from 0 to 100 really, really fast.
Yep.
I mean, when you watch that, and I know you've seen it probably many times now, what do you make of that?
It's really unusual because, again, we would expect somebody who's enraged to be acting differently and showing an aggressive posture. And it's almost like he's too calm and collected and yet methodical at the same time. It's what makes it weird. And I don't know until we get more information how to make sense of it.
The murder ripped open a flood of allegations. Women began coming forward saying Judge Mullins coerced them into for exchange of leniency, avoiding jail, or even custody of their children. These are the allegations. One woman, Tia Adams, told Brian Enton of NewsNation that she had sex with Mullins countless times, sometimes in chambers, and that it was humiliating but impossible to refuse, according to lawsuits and interviews. And I should preface that, not like, oh, I really want him, I can't hold my hands back, but more like, I have no choice in this matter, which would then qualify not as sex, but an SA. According to lawsuits and interviews, these women describe a courthouse where freedom itself was bartered for sexual compliance. None of these allegations have been proven in court, but they paint a very disturbing psychological picture, very much worth examining. In an interview, Adams described the sex as consensual, but said she could not say no. How do you interpret the dynamics of alleged coercion in psychological terms when she's expressing it that way, even now, in these interviews?
Yeah, the poor woman. It's definitely when there's coercion and she's vulnerable and the power imbalance exists. She really didn't have a choice. I can totally understand why it happened. But talk about a dark situation. I mean, this is in essence a horror movie. Yeah. It's just a nightmare, and hard to imagine how this went along for so long. And clearly a lot of people knew about it.
She also alleges in that interview that Mullins deliberately degraded her, gave her money, literally threw money in her face. I mean, like a stripper almost, I would say, and warning her to stay quiet. Why do abusers in authority like to mix humiliation and control in a situation like this? Because I'm assuming that's how they controlled, if this in fact was going on for quite a long time, how they managed this within their chambers. It wasn't just about, let me get you your kids back, let me get you leniency on this sentence, but more like, I got something on you, even though they're the perpetrator.
It speaks of a very dark, we talk about the dark triad personality and psychopathy and sadism. I mean, it speaks of all that stuff. And the idea that a person with this kind of personality could have this kind of power as a judge, it's, again, we go back to how in the world do these people manipulate their way to the top of the food chain, basically. And I have so much compassion for any woman who was victimized in this way, because it affects them for the rest of their lives.
And this, it sounds psychologically confusing to me if you are if you are that woman, if you're the woman that Brian interviewed, if you're any of the women that were being coerced into this life with these people and being part of this system, she admitted that drugs and partying sometimes blurred the experience, meaning the allegations are that she was hanging out with this guy, outside of the chambers as well, where it would go from, I can't turn this down, and it being consensual, to then being out in life and having some sort of relationship here. How does trauma affect all of this? The memory, making victims question whether they were complicit or coerced, because it seems like she said it was very blurred, but that seems to be, if these allegations are true, how the judge would have wanted it.
Yeah, it's very confusing for people in a situation like this. And as you say, we talk about trauma bonding a lot, and people who are victimized, they will tend to blame themselves for it. And certainly if she had addiction issues and an abuse history in childhood, which often those things go together, her tendency would not be to see it very clearly about the level of exploitation and coercion that was going on. And she may have felt at times cared about, even if it was in very limited, small ways. And that can confuse a person who's already got their own vulnerabilities and weaknesses.
It's because predators like this prey on people who don't have that in their life. They don't have somebody telling them the positive things, but then they're able to weave in all of their monstrousness with little hints of positivity. Little hints.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just, I'm getting attention, and I'm getting a crumb of attention from this person. And that's very confusing for them.
In small towns, you hear about this. I mean, not exactly this, but you hear about, little small town controversies, or big small town controversies all the time. And quite often the term that goes around is everybody knew, but nothing stopped it. What does that kind of communal silence do to victims psychologically?
I think it intensifies the damage from the abuser, because it's normalized and everybody knows, but nobody does anything. So how can a victim even recognize that what's happening is wrong? And, again, they'll blame themselves. It's just, it's awful to see that kind of normalization of something that's horrendous going on within a community system.
Why how do communities get into the position where these things fester? Because I don't want to say the communities are set up to be like, hey, let's create a sex cult, in the judge's chambers. But eventually the wrong people get in there and then they start doing bad things. But it often takes a lot of people in a community to make sure something like that stays on the down low. And a lot of people are going to be aware of what's happening. Clearly, there seems to be a lot of people aware here. How do these sort of things fester in communities when it's the dark, dirty secret? Everybody knows or kind of knows, maybe don't want to believe that it's happening, but they know. I mean, that's such a scary thing, but it seems to happen quite a bit.
Group dynamics are weird, and I think it's sort of like the frog in the boiling water. It happens gradually over time. People overlook things, they don't talk about it, but it does make you wonder why it took so long in this case, and you had to have a murder of a judge before things started coming to light. It's another confusing thing about humanity and groups and the way things can be normalized.
She said that she felt relief after Mullins was killed. That's some conflicting emotions there. Help me understand that. How do you explain the conflicted emotions that this victim had when their abuser is suddenly gone?
I think it reminds me a lot of children who have been raised with a lot of physical violence and emotional abuse. And I have seen cases where on one level, they've compartmentalized and they have so much hatred for the parent that's hurt them. But on the other hand, if the parent dies, they may feel a sense of relief, but then they also feel a sense of guilt and responsibility. And those emotions are really complicated. And we like to think that we're all capable of being logical. And in truth, humans are often very confused inside with a lot of cognitive dissonance and holding different realities all at once. And that's one of the things that you try to sort out with them in therapy is, really what's the truth here? And what emotions do you have that are grounded in reality and grounded in the truth? And that can take them some time to sort through.
We use that term normal a lot. Oh, it's normal. It's not normal. We'll get into that in a second because that seems to be, it has a very different definition, I think, to all of us, depending on how we were conditioned and what we're dealing with. The courthouse may not have been the only place corruption thrived here. A former jail guard told Brian Enton the local jail was basically a brothel as well. Supervisors allegedly taking inmates home, guards allegedly pressuring women, and Mullins himself allegedly inviting her to late night sex parties directly. These are the allegations, not proven in court, but even if some of these are true, this wasn't a single bad actor. This was a culture. Some of the allegations that she made to Brian also included female guards taking men home that were in the jail. This was a culture, and when the entire justice system is accused of this type of exploitation, the community itself carries the trauma. When you have these insiders describing the corruption as just normal, I mean, what does that reveal about the psychology of the community conditioned to accept this kind of thing as being okay? I'm guessing they're thinking, well, this must happen everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I would love to think that people didn't know, but as you say, if it's this bad, there had to be more people who knew outside of the system, and it's hard to wrap our heads around that. I think they need entirely new leadership in this government, and it's got to be transparent and focused on ethics and integrity, and it's got to do a complete shift here because it doesn't make sense and how awful this is for people who've been victimized by it.
It makes me wonder how fair of a trial this will be for Mickey Stines, considering we're talking about the justice system and all this taking place within the exact same setting that these allegations are coming out of. It's the same set, it's the same show. He's now just part of it. And it does make me wonder, how deep does this go and how do you get a fair trial? There's so many questions that I think need to be examined here before this thing really gets underway in terms of whose hands are in the cookie jar of this trial. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. This is one that you would probably like to see tried in a different community because there's just a lot of strange stuff that's gone in here. There's
reports within the prison system that there were small rewards given to people in jail who but basically were coerced or assaulted, and then they would get little rewards, commissary, cigarettes, time outside in exchange for sex. Is there a major problem within our jailing system and within our prison system where, look, everything's on the record in court, everything's on the record over here, but once you get there, it kind of seems to be a free-for-all. And you're really up to the jurisdiction of who's running the jail and who's running the prison. And these are not necessarily elected figures. These are just people who have the job. And if you get a corrupt one in place, you have no recourse in most ways if there is something corrupt and horrible going on. This seems to be something we need to take a closer look at in our country because there does seem to be a lot of problems here where things are going off the rails very quickly in our jail populations and prison populations. 100%.
And the other thing that comes to mind, it sure seems like correctional officers in jails and prisons should be made to wear body cameras so you can have somebody in charge of reviewing what is going on with these folks when they're dealing individually with prisoners. There was one jail in California near the community that I used to live and work in, and it was fairly known down in that community. I didn't hear about it until quite a few years later, where men were routinely raped by one particular male guard. And so, and that was happening in the jail. So we need to do a better job. But as with all things about prison and jails, it's not really the average citizen's priority. People don't think about it. And really, we should, because I think even when you're incarcerated for doing something horrible, and many people are not violent criminals who are locked up, but certainly even if you are a violent criminal, I think ethics and integrity in a civilized society, you don't abuse people, They have consequences, which is why they're locked up, but you don't dehumanize them and abuse them, and we shouldn't tolerate that.
And that's such an important thing, is there doesn't seem to be an appetite, and unfortunately this seems to be how everything, runs in our world. If there's no appetite from the villagers and the community to fix something, nothing will be done. And 100%, if there is no appetite because, they're icky people, put them away and let's forget about them, which seems to happen a lot, then it goes on deaf ears. The same in the school system. If they're icky people, let's just move them along, pass the trash a little bit. Yeah. But then people don't get enraged, and people, or when people should be enraged by certain things, like this, in this case, or like the teachers being transferred around and abusing kids from district to district, or like the Catholic Church for years. Takes forever to get enraged. I'll tell you, just from a standpoint of someone who creates content, who puts stories out there. Just recently, we had the Devil's Den massacre that took place right here. Big story. The stories that talk about the murder, that talk about Andrew McGann, the horrible things he did, they do very well. A lot of people are intrigued and get good views. I branched off of that to dive deeper into how he got here, how the education system continued to parse this guy around from school to school to school. And tons of people have children out there. Tons of people have children in school. The titles, the descriptions were very clear about what this was about why someone should be concerned, about why someone should be outraged. But you know what? Those don't get the clicks.
Isn't that weird? Because that's certainly what I would click on.
Yeah.
That's the priority. And what is it about people that sensationalistic things interest them and excite them and attract their attention? But when it comes to what is the work that we really need to do to improve society and keep kids safe, and you and I have talked about the problems with funding child welfare, child protective services, and that's sort of when it comes to budgeting for the government, the kids come last, and therefore you have kids left in situations where they end up dead sometimes, and we talk about those cases. And why is it that people aren't outraged about protecting kids in all areas? And certainly when it comes to treating people in prison and in jail, nobody should be raped, but it's almost like, as you say, these are icky people. And you'll find people even kind of laughing about the abuse of prisoners. And I just like to think that we can do better. But, when you say, yes, those are not the things that get clicks, I'm going, well, maybe this is just going to be the way it is. But we can keep talking
disturbing.
about it.
I love, and I do keep talking about it, but if nobody's listening, what do you do? That's the scary part about this. It's like people should be listening, but people would rather complain that there's all these icky people out there because it makes them feel better if they're letting their voice be heard and their opinion be heard. Great, we know your opinion. We all agree these are icky, horrible people, but you have to do something if you want it to change. It's like a pool that sits there and has slime and algae and all sorts of things growing in it. I want to swim in that pool. Well, great. Here's what you need to do to get it cleaned up. Well, I just want to, they just complain about it. It's still dirty. What did you do to help clean this pool that you so supposedly care about? Well, I complained. Well, you have to take action.
Very much.
And that's the reality. And then the pool just gets muckier and algier and gross and disgusting. And how did we get here? You didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything. Yeah. It's appalling on another level, because if, as a society, we did a better job of ensuring, or at least doing our best, that kids were well parented and had resources for schools, and putting good counselors in schools, not just an academic counselor, but mental health people in schools, and prioritize that. And we could catch some of these people earlier before they start committing violent crimes. If we prioritize that, if we prioritize incentivizing people who could be wonderful foster parents and get kids out of abuse and get them into quality foster homes, which we'd have to come up with a better system to do that, because we don't have enough now. But if we were looking more at prevention, we would have fewer icky people overall. Yeah. And, people, I think they live in their own little worlds and their own little bubbles. And it's too easy. It's just like, what can we do? Everybody complains about homeless people on the street. Well, let's come up with some plans that we can actually measure outcomes and treat mental illness and get people off the streets, offer more in the way of drug addiction services that are effective. A lot of things that we throw money at are not effective, but we can do a better job with a lot of this. But people, they don't want to think about it. Damn. And it's the last priority when it comes to funding. We're really good at funding the military and certain things. We don't fund healthcare, we don't fund mental health services, and we don't fund child protection services.
Which is amusing, because all of those are the roots of all of our problems. I mean, if you go back to all of the issues, if we go back to the recipe and go, hey, here's why your cookies are turning out like shit. Look at your recipe. You don't keep making the same cookies and complaining over and over and over. You're not supposed to put arsenic in them. That's not a good thing. But we just, let's add this too. It's a horrible idea. But then, hey, we want to change something? This flavor's yuck. Fix the recipe. But that's two thoughts, and that seems to be a big difficulty that we have in our society. Probably goes back really to lower, elementary education, almost, I would think, to get younger people thinking in this sort of way, because I think most of their parents don't think that way, and some people are, I think, just too dense to ever get there. But at a younger age, getting people psychologically sound, getting people understanding how their brain works, how their mind works, how their feelings work, how emotions play into their lives and their choices. Maybe we'd start getting people making better choices, rather than it being a shock to them once they hit puberty that, oh my God, I feel so different here. Good luck. Here's the wolves. But that's where we live right now. Fascinating conversation as always. Siobhan Scott, psychotherapist and author. Thank you for joining.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.